Hello and welcome to my top 10 of 2018. We're going to start off with some honourable mentions. Now, Monster Apocalypse was an interesting little board game that came out a few years back. Privateer Press sort of dropped it and they've relaunched it as Monster Apocalypse, the miniatures game. Now this looks interesting. In some ways it's a good idea they've dropped the collectible side. The problem for it for me though was it's a miniatures game which I've sort of fallen out of love with a bit recently, so that's why it's not quite made it into my top 10, but it's definitely a game that I'd love to have a play of. I'm not sure I necessarily want to pick it up, particularly as it's a little bit pricey and it's a miniatures game which I'm sort of pushing to one side because they're very bulky on space and you've got to keep up with them, etc, etc. But definitely a game I think that if you're into miniatures games will probably be one for your top 10. Moving on then, Keyforge. Now this is by Richard Garfield, who you probably know as the Magic the Gathering designer amongst many other games, and Keyforge is a really cool twist on the sort of LCG, CCG market. It's basically a sealed starter format whereby you buy a starter deck, open it and play it. There's no deck building to do, although I guess you could house rule that if you want to in your gaming group. Basically you buy a deck and play, and it's got loads of weird kind of design algorithms going on in the background to make in theory playable decks, and there have been a couple of errors, but on the whole it seems to be working. I'm intrigued because the gameplay looks really good, the game rules seem pretty solid, and it's relatively cheap to buy, and you can buy 3 decks for less than £60, and in theory you never need to buy another deck at all. Where it might go wrong, of course, is you might end up with a deck you really hate. So it's an interesting idea, nice to see some fresh approaches to game design, and it's definitely one I want to play, particularly as I've discovered my friend has I think about 6 decks, so that's definitely one for me to try and get to the table this year. Pandemic Fall of Rome. This looks really interesting. I wasn't able to get hold of this, but it's definitely one I'm interested in. The base Pandemic game rules are pretty solid. There have been very many attempts to sort of re-implement it, and Fall of Rome looks like the best go at it return, and basically the viruses have been replaced by invading barbarians, and yeah, really want to get hold of this one and get it to the table. I'm interested in the subject matter, and the gameplay looks pretty interesting, although it does involve some dice, so just beware of that if you're not so keen on too much random in your game. Ruby is another game that just misses out on the top 10 for me. One of the reasons being I don't actually own it. I've only played a friend's copy. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. It's a Kickstarted licensed game, so I was a bit like, is it going to be any good? And it's actually pretty decent. The miniatures are quite nice. The artwork's really nice, in particular if you like the manga style of the, I think it's a YouTube show. Really interesting ideas going on with card economy, and it's pretty tough and not too bad at all. Definitely worth your while checking it out. Tim Fowles has produced some really good games, and Now Boarding is another game which I've actually done a video on. It just misses out on the top 10 because I haven't really got it to the table enough, and part of the problem with that is because it's a real-time game, and there are other games that I think just appeal to me more. But yeah, it's a nice little game with his interest in sort of illustration style graphics that he goes for on quite a few of his games. Definitely one that I want to get to the table more, and it might actually creep up my rankings if I played a little bit more. So that's definitely one to keep an eye on. In a similar sort of ballpark is CO2 Second Chance. Now, this is a reprint, effectively, of the original CO2 with some tweaks and some improved components, etc. It hasn't got to the table yet, which is one of the reasons it's not in my top 10. Once it's in my top 10, once I've played it, it'll probably get into my top 10. So watch this space on that one. But really good game, and I think I'm going to enjoy it once I finally get my brain around teaching it to other people and actually playing it. Now, a game that just misses out on my top 10 is Western Legends. Now, there's a very good reason for this. I don't actually own it. I've only actually played my friend's copy, and there are a couple of little concerns over it as to, some of the strategies of how you could win the game, but we haven't played it enough yet to call it. But I love the theme. I think particularly with my friends tweaking it a bit by adding in some nice components from other games, it's really, really good. And there is actually a Kickstarter going on at the moment which will mix things up and makes the game look really, really interesting to me. So really, really rate Western Legends. Really good game. It just misses out. I guess this is my number 11. So now we've got that all out the way, let's get into my top 10. And just to give you an idea of why stuff is in or not in my top 10, I went to Board Game Geek and did a search for all games produced in 2018, and then I worked out, have I played it? Have I seen enough about it to be able to speak about it? Do I own it? So the games that are higher up in the top 10 are, I enjoy playing them and I own them typically. Not always the case, but that's one of the big criteria. If I don't own it, then how can it be in my top 10? Like, Western Legends, I really, really rate, but I haven't gone out and bought a copy. I'm happy to play my friend's copy. Now, you might have a different way of judging games, and like I don't have to own it to rate it, and that's a very valid concern. But to be honest, one of my games is quite high up on my top 10 list. I don't actually own, so I haven't 100% followed that rule. Anyway, let's start off with number 10 then. And number 10 is a game that, ironically, I have on order but hasn't arrived yet, and that is Invisible Sun: The Black Cube. Now, depending on how you view this either came out in 2017, 2018 or 2019. So I will actually have a physical copy of the product in 2019, but I've actually got some PDFs in 2018, so I've got enough to sort of form an opinion. Now, I do have some concerns over it. One problem with it is ridiculously expensive. The second problem with it is it's effectively out of print, because you could only really get it via Kickstarter there. Now, there might be the possibility of picking up some extra copies off Monty Cook Games' website in the future. The other problem with it is it's sort of a game loosely based around the Cypher system, but is its own unique game engine, and this could cause some issues going down the line, and it's got a very strange setting which drew me to it. Basically, you're all magic users who live in the shadow and have now awakened to your power and returned to the real world known as the actuality. And it's a weird, surreal role-playing game where basically you're all magic users, and there's lots of really cool ideas in here. But role-playing games are one of my biggest loves, but one of the hardest things for me to get to the table due to time commitments and so forth. And, the Black Cube being such an expensive deluxe premium product, it's a little bit like, should I have bought it? But it's just too good to pass up on, and the production quality is off the chart, and there's some really cool ideas in there. So I'm hoping to get this one to the table and for everyone to buy into it, because it's a really cool setting as well. Anyway, now that we've got a role-playing game out the way, let's get back to board games. So my number 9, Glorantha: The Gods' War. Now, this one's a little bit of an iffy one, so you might want to bump this off the chart and replace it, I guess, with Western Legends, or move everything up by one. But Glorantha: The Gods' War, strictly speaking, has been released in 2018, although my copy is still on the boat, so I won't receive it till 2019. Now, this is basically a re-implementation of Cthulhu Wars, which is a really good game that I really enjoy. It's set in the world of Glorantha, which I first came across way back in RuneQuest 2, the role-playing game, and it's an epic, mythic fantasy realm where you have typically the Orlanthi tribesmen pitted against the evil, or not, depending on your viewpoint, Lunar Empire. And the Gods' War is, I believe, set a little bit earlier in the timeline where the various gods of chaos and the sky and the storm and all this are fighting against each other. And there's lots of really cool stuff. So you've got like Kyger Leadtor, Yelm, or Lanth himself, the lunar goddess, I think Malia or Maya. All these weird, wonderful gods are there fighting, and it is a tweak on the Cthulhu Wars game, so it's not the same. And I love the setting. I like the Cthulhu Wars game engine, so bring that all together, we're going to have some really great games of this, I think. My only concern is this again falls into the category of ridiculously overproduced with these bigatures. It's not a cheap game, and most worrying of all is how to store it. Storing Cthulhu Wars is a major logistical issue. I think God's War falls into the same category, so there you go. So if you want to eliminate this as a 2018 game, just bump it out, move up The Invisible Sun and Western Legends, and away you go. Anyway, let's move on to yet another Peterson game, Evil High Priest. Now this takes up a lot less space. I don't think it looks as pretty, and in fact it falls into one of the criticisms I do have of Peterson games, where sometimes they're designed to be game friendly, so the design is simple to read, but the aesthetics suffer a bit, and that's the one thing I would criticize the game for, is that maybe it's not quite pretty enough. Now this needs to hit the table a bit more for it to secure its position, but yeah, if it's as good as Cthulhu Wars, it's going to stay in my top 10 for 2018. However, I have played some other games by the Peterson Games studio where I'm not so keen on it, and with the aesthetics, if the game's not desperately inspiring and the aesthetics, it could easily drop down quite quickly. But it seems to be getting good ratings. It's a game I want to do a video on. I just simply haven't had the time to unbox it and read it and feel comfortable doing a video on, but watch this space. Anyway, let's move on to another game that came out in 2018, which was Brass Birmingham. Now, I would say Brass Lancashire, Brass Birmingham, you can put either of them, or just Brass if you want. Now, Brass is a classic game which was revamped and made all pretty via Brass Lancashire, and then there's a spin-off variant called Brass Birmingham. And again, this hasn't got to the table enough for me to want to talk about it. In fact, again, it's another one of the games on my I need to do a video about it, but again, time constraints and how comfortable I feel with doing a video on it, because I don't really know enough about it yet to feel comfortable doing a video about it. And that is your number 7. Number 6, a game very similar to a game that's been out before, Too Many Bones, Undertow this time. Now this is a standalone game, but also an expansion, and in particular I include all the extra Kickstarter bits that you could get in the Undertow campaign, which includes actually a proper campaign mode for Too Many Bones, which I think the game desperately needs. Now Undertow, by adding it to my Too Many Bones collection, again, it's something that's very deluxe, very big, and for me it might slip down based purely on the fact that it's just such a pain to carry around and get to the table, because it's a big bulky game, but I do really enjoy it. I think it is the best game that Chip Theory Games have in their game library, and I do rate it, and some of the tweaks they've done for effectively version 3 of Too Many Bones have really hopefully stabilised the game now, and people can really get into it and enjoy it, and some really cool little features going on in this particular game. So there you go, that is my top half of my top 10. We're now entering the top 5, and controversially, my number 5 is a game I don't actually own. It's Villainous. I've only ever played my friend's copy. We've played it multiple times. I think I've played it 3 or 4 times, I want to say. Really enjoyed it every single time. I don't think it's desperately easy to pick up in the UK, but it's not particularly hard either. But the actual production quality is pretty decent. The little kind of see-through kind of placeholders for your miniature, they're really nice. Your villain marker, I guess, would be the way to call it. And the cartoon artwork is really nice. I think the what is it, power chips, I think they're called. They could be better quality, but overall the production standard's pretty good. The gameplay's interesting. Each villain plays slightly differently. It's a game that desperately needs an expansion, I think, to give it, you know, long-term longevity, but you'll get plenty of play out of this if you play at least each villain once or twice. You know, that's lots of gameplay right there, and I really enjoy this. It's actually quite fun. There is a little bit of take that, but it's not a major issue, and it's quite interesting how each villain has a slightly different win condition. I think some villains are a little bit easier than others to play, but there you go. Great sort of family game, to be honest. Right, let's now move into yet more overproduced, lots of miniatures type games. We're talking about Cool Mini or Not, and in particular Zombicide Green Horde. I really enjoyed the Zombicide fantasy setting, so when they announced Green Horde, I was all over that, and you should have seen lots of videos from me about that. Really good addition to the game. It's not essential. I think you could live with just the Black Plague, but you know, if you didn't pick up Black Plague, you can get in on Green Horde, or even combine it with Black Plague for an uber kind of mismatch of the various games. Really good, really enjoyable, but again, another game that takes up lots of space, and this is definitely giving me logistical problems, especially when we move on to my number 3, and that is Rising Sun, another game by Cool Mini or Not. I'm not sure. I ummed and ahed about switching Zombicide and Rising Sun around with each other. I think the miniatures are slightly better in Rising Sun. It's a game that's maybe more palatable to the broad gamer base, whereas Zombicide's maybe a bit more of a gamer's game, for want of a better word, even though it's slightly beer and pretzels. So Rising Sun, Zombicide, the sort of joint third maybe would be a better way of viewing them. Again, overproduced, takes up loads of space, particularly if you picked up the Kickstarter edition, and I think it is a real shame actually that the retail version does suffer compared to the Kickstarter version due to some of the component upgrades. Now the extra miniatures, missing out on those is a bit of a pain, but not a big deal. But you know, the Turtle Clan having miniatures in the Kickstarter version but cardboard chits in the retail version is a little bit sad for me, although I believe you can pick up a 3D printable version of the Turtle stronghold, so it's not totally disastrous. But yeah, really good game. The weakest element of it, I think, is the combat system. I did quite like sort of the simplicity of the Blood Rage combat system, but yeah, it's interesting. Rising Sun, Blood Rage, they are slightly interchangeable. I think if you've got one, you don't necessarily need the other, but they are different enough that you could justify both. Now there is, in theory, meant to be a load of diplomacy in Rising Sun, and I can see how that could come in, but yeah, I don't know. In some ways I do miss the drafting element of Blood Rage, but yeah, overall very pleased with Rising Sun. Would like to get it to the table a bit more. Played it maybe 3 times, I think, and this is one of the problems I've actually had with 2018, is getting games unboxed and read and played has been tricky. I've had a very busy personal life which has eaten into both my video creation and my gameplay ability. So my top 2 are partially in the top 2 because they're the games I've played the most and enjoyed the most as well. So let's get on to those, and let's go with number 2, which is Root. Now Root is based around the sort of coin game engine, the counterinsurgency. So basically you've got the sort of evil cat empire have moved into the forest. They've kicked out the old decrepit bird empire, and that means the forest people are being subjugated by, you know, either the birds who are trying to move back in, or the cat people, or the marquee. So yeah, interesting sort of idea there. And then you've got this little kind of rogue raccoon running around causing sort of weird trouble of his own, and yeah, it's very interesting sort of take. I mean, you could easily retheme this game to be set in maybe a modern setting with, you know, terrorists and counter-revolutionaries and all that stuff, and it wouldn't feel that out of place, but because it's been all cutesified, it makes it quite palatable. And I think this is one of the problems it does have, is because it appears cute, you kind of go, oh, it's a cute game, and then it's actually quite a meaty game in some ways, but equally it's not a really super heavy war game. So it's very interesting. Now, the biggest problem with the game, and the thing that's going to maybe make it drop down the list in the long term, is it's a little bit of a bear to teach, because each faction has its own set of rules, and I don't even have the expansion yet, which includes yet another, I think 2 factions that have their own set of rules. So potentially you have to sort of almost learn how to play the game 6 or 7 times. But having said that, when you actually start playing the game, the player boards they provided you with give you everything you need to know how to play the game. So that what looks like a really high barrier to entry actually sort of fades away once you're actually playing the game, because the basic rules are pretty simple. And this is something that also applies to my game number 1, where the basic rules are simple, but it's all the little extra bits that make it seem a lot harder. So yeah, Root, really good game, definitely get a game of it. And it was relatively cheap and really nice production quality. So yeah, definitely cool. And as it says on the page there, with the Riverfolk expansion, you can get up to 6 players playing, although I think 4 is probably plenty. The game doesn't outstay its welcome with 4 players. I think with slightly less, it's maybe not interesting enough. I think 3, 4 or 5 is probably the ideal number, with 4 being literally the perfect number. But who can say? I haven't played it enough at different player counts to be definitive on that point. Anyway, Root, definitely worth checking out. And let's move on to my top pick of the year. And this game actually squeaks in on multiple merits. One, I actually picked it up secondhand on Christmas Eve. I had pre-ordered it, but due to the limited print run, a lot of suppliers were understocked, and therefore my pre-order actually got cancelled and I got a refund, and using the money from that I was able to pick up a second-hand copy. That's probably given away what the game is if you've been following closely the news, and it's Teotihuacan, the City of Gods. Now I hope I've pronounced that properly. This game intrigued me before it even came out. I was quite a big fan of Tzolk'in, and I believe this is a sort of spiritual and that's a spiritual ancestor to this game, and a lot of the ideas in Tzolk'in you can sort of feel in Teotihuacan. And for me, the problem with Tzolk'in, it had that pretty cool wheel idea, but I don't know, the theme didn't quite work for me. I guess for me, a game set in Mesoamerica where you've got some pyramids, well, you want to be building a pyramid, which you didn't really do in Tzolk'in, but you do in City of the Gods. And yeah, I really enjoy it. The aesthetics for me are wonderful. You've got this lovely cover image here, so let's just go have a look at this here. So this cover, I mean, look at that. You've got right there, you can see what the game's all about. It's you're building the temple. Now what the cover doesn't talk about is the fact that you could also honour the dead as well. But here you go. Not sure what that is. That's some fan-made mod by the looks of it. But yeah, there's all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff going on in here where people have done stuff. So I think that some of this is the prototype boards, which got me intrigued. And as you can see, it's got little cubes here rather than circles. But yeah, some of this did actually make it into the final product. So for example, you've got your temple tracks here, which is very Tzolk'in, with little tiles that you can claim as you're going along. As you're coming around what's basically a rondel, you can pick up various bits and pieces. And this is the bit that I really like, the building the temples. As you can see, you can build your little pyramid or your ziggurat if you prefer, and you score points by going along here. All sorts of little fiddly bits. There's also coloured icons, which is another way of tweaking the game to get yourself more points. So lots of little tweaks and twiddly bits going on, which makes the game seem much more complex than it is. And as you can see, all sorts of stuff. And basically this is the game as you'll get it out the box. Now looking at this, it looks like they've got the standard board set up, which is the way I've played it. However, you do have these extra boards that you can deploy onto the various spots to change where things are. You've also got all these little tiles here that randomly go on these grey spaces. These are like starting tiles that help you get your starting resources and where you start. And then, if I remember correctly, this little pile up here is for randomizing the powers you get from the what I believe is known as the palace. And as you can see, the game has lots of bits to worry about. So do you collect gold? Do you activate a palace power? Do you get wood? Do you invent a technology to give you a bonus as you're playing the game? Do you get wood over here? Sorry, that's stone. This is wood. Do you build the actual blocks of the temple, or do you decorate the steps of the temple? Do you try and go up the temples? Do you build honor, stuff honoring the dead, which has impacts with stuff going on over here? Do you manipulate your dice so they become stronger, but if you manipulate them too high, they do what's known as ascend? But when you ascend, that can be good potentially, because it can get you access to little bonuses over here. So lots and lots of stuff going on, and it can sound like a really complex game, but when you actually play it, the rules are pretty simple. You basically move your dice 1, 2 or 3. They typically go up in value, and you try and score the most points to win, and you do that before there's too many eclipses. So there's a little white disc, which yeah, there it is, little white disc that starts up the top here. It comes down when it meets the black disc. You've had an eclipse. That's an end of an era, and after 3 eras the game's over, and this little black disc moves up with each era, so each era gets shorter. And it's a really tight game, really makes your head hurt actually, because you're thinking, do I want to do this, do I want to do that? And I've actually played it 3 times since Christmas Eve, which, considering that's less than 25 days, that's actually pretty good for me with the rate of games I'm playing at the moment. And every single time I've seen different strategies, different winners pursuing different strategies, and yeah, there's still more to uncover in this. I like the theme, I like the aesthetics, I like the fact that I can mix it up. If it starts getting a bit stale, I can maybe mix the locations up or start using these tiles. I've just played with the basic board for now, and there's loads of fun just to be had with that. I think people are scoring 150 points plus when they're winning. I did see one guy sort of solo demonstrating the game, and he scored quite a lot of points, and so there's definitely more strategy and tactics to unlock in the game. And this is a game I really want to do a video on properly, and not maybe be quite so mumbly about, oh, there's this and there's this and that. So yeah, Teotihuacan for me is my game of the year in 2018. Absolutely loved it. Really, really enjoyable, and definitely one to check out. And if you don't like the imagery, I don't know what's wrong with you. It's just fantastic. Let's see, can we zoom in on some of this stuff? I mean, look at it. It's just lovely, clean aesthetic. I love the temples. I love this wooden block temple you build here, where you can manipulate the icons to score more points, and by matching coloured symbols. So this coloured symbol, if you laid it down on top of this symbol here, because they match and it's coloured, you'd advance on that temple. Lots of really cool bits. And do you want to go for technology? Do you want to pick up face masks? Do you want to pick up resources, victory points? Lots going on. Really, really exciting and dynamic gameplay. Little different strategies, and then the little detail on the board of, like, here someone's working some stone, and over here some wood. There's probably someone getting sacrificed somewhere if you looked hard enough, and parrots and bushes and stuff. Fabulous, fabulous game. Well done, and I'm really looking forward to the reprint, so lots of people can enjoy this game, because that's the big problem right now, that access to the game is a little bit challenging right now. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed a quick look at my top 10 and some of my potential honourable mentions as well. So do you agree with me? Do you not? Check it out down in the comments below. And obviously, if you really enjoyed doing the work, please support me on Patreon, because yeah, it's getting a bit expensive keeping on top of board games and filming stuff, and I'd love to be able to upgrade my equipment and get some more videos out there. Anyway, I hope you have a great 2019, some really exciting games to get to the table for me, and also some really cool games in the pipeline as well. So it could be a good year. Anyway, till the next video, take care.